Hello and welcome to video 3 in this little series about some of the biggest lessons I've been learning and implementing and embodying over the last year to 2 years. So today I'm going to really talk about radical responsibility. I mentioned this topic in video 2, but then felt like it actually needed its own video. So here we are today with this. Radical responsibility is a concept that I have honestly been working with for years, like working with the energy of responsibility, working with the energy of being radically responsible for myself and my choices, working with where is the line between responsibility and fault, where is the line between like responsibility and not being responsible, like how do we determine all of this stuff? I mean, it's complicated. It's not straightforward. So I'm going to talk about it today. As always, this is me sharing my journey, and I share this in the hope that what I share can help you find your own inner truth. I don't expect you to agree with everything I say. In fact, I hope you don't agree with everything I say so that you can take some of what I say and use it as self-inquiry to figure out things that are the truth for you, because truth is subjective. There is no one truth. These are just things I have found that fit and work with the truth that is true for me right now. And I say it that way because my truth might change in a year or two, or in a decade, but this is the truth of what I have found for the moment. And the best thing about truth, because it is subjective, there is no one truth, is that we get to let our ego go with truth. We're never going to be totally right. There is no one truth in anything. And so that means that, I can share this with you and hope that it helps you in some way find your own truth, but I'm also not attached to it because I'm not right any more than you are right or anyone else is right. So anyway, radical responsibility. Um man, radical responsibility. At first, I just want to define radical responsibility really as taking radical, and by radical I mean like no questions asked, like I am responsible, taking radical, intense, like no ego barred, like you're not being held back by your ego or your like worries, like saving face, anything like that. Like I am just responsible. So taking radical responsibility for yourself, for your choices, for your life. I think this is one of the keys to life, honestly, to living happily. One of the keys to spiritual, quote unquote, enlightenment. Not that I'm enlightened, but like if we're on the path towards enlightenment, I think radical responsibility has to be something we talk about and that we strive for on that path. Radical responsibility is key. It is paramount. So, that's why I'm talking about it. I bring it in to sessions and programs with clients. We talk about responsibility, and we talk about taking choice, like making your own choices and taking choice and saying, I am responsible for this choice. And, I have to be responsible for following this choice through and continuing to make the choice so that I get what I want and I do what I want. And I become what I want to become and who I want to become. And so, radical responsibility is really a way of life for me, but I would say I've deepened into it even more in the last few months and even few weeks. I mean, I feel like I've been deepening into radical responsibility for a while, into a whole other layer of it, which is why I want to talk about it. So, let's see. Radical responsibility is how I heal victim patterns in myself, because I am not someone. So I'm going to talk radical responsibility and victimhood in this video. They are intertwined in their teachings for me and for how I work. I am not someone who believes that it is helpful to keep part of yourself as a victim in any way. I believe victimhood, we have to find victimhood and love it and heal it and root it out. And part of getting rid of victimhood is calling in radical responsibility. Because if we don't call in radical responsibility, then we just keep ourselves in victim mode, and that's not helpful. So what I mean by this, let me give some examples. Let me kind of get into the nitty gritty. I have been a victim of many things, just like you have, just like every single person in this world has been a victim of something. And some of us have been victims of bigger things than others. And that is a truth. Some people literally have been more victimized than others. And there are people who have been really victimized. And that's a truth. They've been through terrible things. Here's the thing though. What happened to you? This is a line I've heard other people say, but this is not my original wording of this specific idea, but I think it's pretty common, honestly. What happened to you is not your fault, but it is your responsibility how you deal with it. And so victimhood, becoming a victim is not your fault, but it is your responsibility how you respond to any situation or person that made you a victim. Do you keep yourself in victim mode? Like living as if that might happen to you again, or living with the wounds and just wearing them as a badge of honor in some senses, or a badge of defense, a badge of projecting people away, pushing them away? Or do you look at, this is what happened, and I am responsible for how I move through this, how I integrate it, how I learn from it, and how I live with this. And I don't want to live with this as a victim. So I am responsible for making myself unvictimized. I do not recommend ever leaving parts of yourself untouched that say, I'm a victim. What I mean by that is any part of you that says, hey, I'm a victim, whether it's a 5-year-old part of you or a 25-year-old part of you, any part of you that says, hey, I'm a victim here, I was a victim, that part needs to be worked with. They need to be loved. They need to be brought forward. They need to be healed. They need to be whatever process you're using. I have a ton of methods that I do this with clients. So whatever, we'll leave the how aside because there's lots of ways you can choose to do this, but those parts need to be brought forward and healed until they let go of their victimhood and they can be reintegrated into your wholeness. So if I find a part of myself that is in victim mode, I don't leave her there. I go to her and I say, oh, where are you saying you're a victim? Show me, tell me. And then I do my work. Maybe I'm using shamanic work, or I'm going into the Akashic records, or I'm doing some kind of star work, or I'm doing body work until that victim part puts down her victimhood and comes back into me as my powerful, peaceful self, adult self, right now self. Because I don't want to be a victim anywhere. Just because I have been a victim doesn't mean that I stay a victim. That is my choice. That is my radical responsibility to make the choice of, do I want to stay a victim in any way? Or do I want to say, no, I'm not being victimized by this for my whole life. And I'm actually going to choose to put this one down and heal it and not stay in that victimhood. We have a choice. We always have a choice. So that brings me to radical responsibility. I'm going to tell a short story of how I have recently tapped back into radical responsibility in a new way that I want to share as an example. So I was playing with some stories of victimhood that happened to me, and playing also within the places of myself that fear responsibility, because with a viewpoint of radical responsibility, I need to be able to take responsibility for all of my stuff so I'm not a victim, which has always served me well and served everyone I've ever brought it forward into our lives with well. I was getting stuck mentally on these things that had happened to me and going, well, how do I take radical responsibility for this? Because what those people did to me was terrible, and I'm not at fault for that. And so I'm not responsible. That was where I was sitting for a while, for like a few months. And then I came back to it and I was like, this still doesn't feel finished. Like there's still part of me that feels victimized by this. So I haven't gotten deep enough because I don't want to walk around with that victimization. I know I don't need to. So I look and I'm like, and I realized, so at first I try on I'm responsible for everything. I'm responsible for everything those people did to me. I'm responsible for my actions afterwards. I'm responsible for my victim, where I keep myself in victim mode. Like, I am responsible for every single thing. I'm responsible, every single part of it, responsible. And I was like, I could live with that more. That felt better. It wasn't quite right, but it felt better. I was like, well, I'd rather be responsible. But then I was like, but then I'm blaming myself for something terrible that I didn't ask for. And then I sat with it again and I was like, oh, right, of course. It's so obvious in hindsight. But for some reason, it did take me a while to get here. And this is sometimes how processing and healing looks. I was like, oh, duh. I'm not at fault for what the people did to me. That victimized me deeply in that time. They made me a really bad victim. They made me a terrible victim, like deeply victimized. I'm not responsible for that. I am responsible, though, for continuing to keep myself victimized. I am responsible for how I react. I am responsible for how I am using this in my life. I am responsible for my feelings afterwards. And I am also am responsible for putting myself in those situations. Again, I'm not responsible for what they did. I'm not at fault. But I did put myself in situations that in hindsight weren't the best situations I would never choose to put myself in again, because I learned something from them, which means I have responsibility. I'm also an adult. If I looked back at my child self who went through traumas, I wouldn't say to her, you're responsible for putting yourself in that situation. That's ridiculous. If I look back at my 18-year-old self, though, who went through trauma, she is an adult. Her brain may not be fully formed, but she learned from those things, which means she has responsibility because she put herself in situations that weren't the best and she learned from them. My even older adult self, I'm not at fault for things that people do to me if it makes me a victim in some way. Like if someone came and like broke into my house, I'm not responsible. I'm not at fault for them breaking into my house unless I left my door unlocked. Then maybe I am at fault. I don't do that though. But I am responsible for, I just tripped myself up. I am not at fault for them breaking into my house, but I am responsible for potentially leaving my door unlocked to let them do it. Or I am responsible for not making sure I have better security for my home, or I am responsible for how I react to it. Because if someone can break in, then I'm probably responsible for something that made my place look like enticing. I had an office space in 2022 that got broken into. I was not responsible or at fault for the break-in. Someone else was. Someone else like left a door unlocked and people got in. But the door to my office, which was locked, the lock was pretty flimsy. And I had just moved into the office space and I hadn't brought it up yet to the landlord because I was like, let me get settled and then I'll ask for a better lock. So I'm responsible for the fact that I didn't ask for a better lock sooner. If I had a better lock, my door wouldn't have probably gotten broken into, because other people with better locks, their offices didn't get touched. Mine did. The only thing that they stole was a lighter, which was hilarious. Like I had a ton of valuable stuff in my office and they stole nothing but a lighter. But I'm still responsible in a sense for not upping my security, not saying, hey, this lock is flimsy. I was trusting in the exterior doors staying locked, right? I'm responsible for placing my trust there. Not at fault for what happened, but I do have responsibility. That has been such a powerful little mind lesson, mind game to bring into everything in my life. Okay, someplace where I felt like a victim or where I became a victim. I'm not at fault for what someone else did, but where can I find my responsibility in it? Because if I can find responsibility, that immediately erases victimhood. It takes back my power. If I have responsibility, I'm not a victim. I am an empowered person who can see where I made a mistake or where I have responsibility and I can learn from that thing. And therefore, I'm not a victim. And I'm not using specifics here. I'm not using specifics in a lot of the examples I'm giving because I don't want to go into deep specific traumas. I don't think it's necessary in this video. But I am talking about some pretty intense things. Like I'm talking about really traumatic events. I'm not talking about like, I don't know, my water bottle was stolen at the gym. I don't know. Like I'm not talking about small things. I'm talking about big things that are really hard to take responsibility for. Take responsibility for what we were part of. Like, for example, I'll use one example just because I did mention this in one of the first videos, in the first video of the series where I talked about weight. I've done this for every single time I've ever been in a sexual assault situation. I'm not at fault for whatever was done to me. I am responsible for anything I walked into as an adult. I am responsible for putting myself in some kind of situation. That is a really hard pill to swallow because the mainstream societal like take on sexual assault is either it's all the victim's fault. We have one side of the aisle, as it were, I guess. I don't want to make this political, but one side of the belief that's like it's all the victim's fault. They dressed wrong, but whatever. Or it's not my fault at all. And the truth is it's somewhere in there. It's somewhere in between. It really is. Because you can always take responsibility. And this has been hard as hell, because it's an incredibly horrible situation. And again, I'm not saying I don't do this for things that happened to me in my childhood. This is like after 18 only. But anything after age of 18 or on, I can look at it and say, I'm not at fault for what someone did to me, but I am responsible for any choices I made that put myself in situations that were maybe not the best. And maybe I didn't know at that time, but I learned from it, which means I have responsibility to take care of myself. And I have responsibility for what I chose to do that may have put myself in harm's way. Because if I can take responsibility, again, that victimhood disappears. It's gone. If I have responsibility, there is no victimhood here anymore. I'm good. I'm gone. It's gone. I'm done. And that's a powerful, powerful shift. I mean, that is revolutionary. That is a radical responsibility. That is saying, I am not going to allow any power or peace to be taken from me. That's saying, I have responsibility in everything. And if I can hold the responsibility of anything that has made me a victim, then I can hold the responsibility of anything that makes me successful or bright or visible. Right? If I can hold the responsibility for the worst things in my life, those things are so hard to hold. And if I can say, yes, I see my responsibility in every single one of those bad things, because I do. And this has been a big journey of mine. I can see responsibility for every single bad thing that's happened to me, quote unquote happened to me. That's victim language. I'm going to use it that way because they did happen to me. I don't say that as a victim at this point, but I would have a year ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. If I can hold that responsibility, then I can hold responsibility for anything good that happens to me because that's so much easier. That makes me happy. The bad stuff made me miserable. The good stuff makes me happy. So if I can hold responsibility for the bad, then my capacity to hold responsibility for the good is massive. It's overextended. It's huge. So that's what we're doing when we take radical responsibility. We are learning how to hold the bad and expand our container to hold the good. Because if I can hold anything that's bad, I can hold anything that's good. And isn't that what we all want? We want joy, we want peace, we want happiness, we want success, we want, whatever it is that you want, we want those things. And we can hold them better if we can hold all the bad and say, hey, yeah, I see what happened there. And I'm okay. I'm not a victim. I have this responsibility here and I'm good. I'm good. So it's empowering. When I adopted this viewpoint and started bringing everything that I've been through this lens, everything shifted for me internally. And it shifts our external world as well. It shifts internally first, always. And then we see the external. The external can be a little slower. It's okay. It's worth it. It's empowering. It's so empowering. And I want you to feel that that empowerment. So radical responsibility, try it. practice some radical responsibility for the next few days, the next week, the next month. And if you want some guidance for radical responsibility, I have mentorship open. I also have my apprenticeship open. Mentorship's one-on-one, apprenticeship is group. But in both places, we talk a lot about radical responsibility, and you have me personally holding you accountable for taking control of your stories and bringing in your responsibility. All right. Thank you for joining me for this video. I hope this has been helpful. I would love to hear how this resonated and landed with you, what parts you agree with, anything you don't. I'd love to hear. Again, this is sharing from my lens. I don't expect my lens to be the truth for everybody. And I'm not right about everything in the world, but this has been what's worked for me and continues to work. And I want to share it so that you can try on this viewpoint. I will see you in the next video. I'm sending you a lot of blessings and love. Mwah.